Hello and welcome to another episode of the Driven Podcast. My name is Sam Parkinson, and today I'm bringing you an interview that I recorded just recently with the CEO of Everything Electric, Dan Caesar. Everything Electric being the team behind some of the world's biggest EV festivals. What started as a YouTube channel hosted by Robert Llewellyn from Red Dwarf has become quite a global phenomenon with events across the UK, Europe, the US, and even Australia, including next month's Everything Electric show in Melbourne. We talked about those events and how they differ around the world, the state of EV adoption in the UK versus Australia, and whether Europe has already hit its tipping point for EV sales. Dan also talked about some of the details of his new venture, which is called Electric Vehicles UK, or EV UK, a project designed to make test driving and buying an EV easier than ever. So we were actually going to slot this interview in the middle of our last episode, but the interview went on a bit longer than we thought, just because it was actually just a really good conversation, a really good chat. So we wanted to make an episode of its own for it. So recorded a few days ago, and please enjoy this chat with Dan Caesar, the CEO of Everything Electric. Okay, we've got Dan Caesar, who is the CEO of Fully Charged, otherwise known now as Everything Electric. Dan, thanks very much for joining us on the Driven Podcast. I know it's a bit early there in London time, but appreciate you being on the show.
I love listening to The Driven and reading it as well, so it's a pleasure for me to be here.
Oh, thank you. Now, you've managed to, through Everything Electric, formerly Fully Charged, for those who aren't already familiar with it, has become quite a prominent voice in the EV and electrification space globally. You've managed to take a bloke from Red Dwarf chatting about EVs on YouTube and turned it into festivals with tens of thousands of people. When did you realize that this had become a little bit more than just a YouTube channel?
I mean, I think from my perspective, Robert Llewellyn, who started the channel back in 2010, it was really quite disruptive if you think about it. It seems so early now. I'm going to set up a YouTube channel. It's going to be about EVs and everything around that, and really, really prescient. In fact, some would argue way too early, Sam, if I'm completely honest. And when we met sort of 5 or 6 years into that journey, he developed a bit of a cult following that he brought over from his previous things like Red Dwarf, from Scrap Heap Challenge, people who were kind of early EV adopters. But it was, relatively small, although the quality of it was very, very high. I was really impressed when I first found it. I thought this is kind of almost like TV standards on YouTube. And we met, and I had the similar kind of background as him. I was driving EV. I've been promoting these technologies for a long time, but I guess I was a business guy, a corporate guy who knew how to kind of structure a business, and we just shared the same passion. And sort of he co-opted me, and I was very happily co-opted to come in and sort of turn it into a business. And really, from our standpoint, one of the things that I'd done a lot of in my past was events, and it was logical really to start something which started as Fully Charged Live back in 2018 at Silverstone Racecourse in the UK, and we've just delivered our 20th show globally in Canada earlier this month. So from our standpoint, it's been an incredible journey. So we were disrupting on YouTube in 2010, disrupting with events since 2018, and I think we're entering a new chapter of doing new disruptive things as well, but all with an aim really to get people into EVs, get people buying batteries, buying solar, and those sorts of things. And thanks to Robert, we really have had quite a big impact, just as the Driven has, because mainstream media either doesn't want to talk about this or doesn't really understand it. So it's given people like the Driven, given people like Fully Charged, now Everything Electric, the opportunity to be that sort of communication channel. And it's it's an amazing. I'm not even going to call it a job. It is hard work, but it's not a job. I do love it.
Well, I mean, I'm sure it is a lot of hard work, but as someone that has attended the shows in Australia, it's been it's such a great sort of space to come in and watching a YouTube channel is one thing, and Rob obviously does a great job of presenting on that, but just having a space where you can kind of have everything there all once. And it's not just about electric vehicles, of course, it's electrification more generally, which is highly relevant. I imagine globally, but from our perspective, especially in Australia at the moment, it's a big talking point. The electrification of everything, the way in which we source energy and use energy. Um, these festivals, as you said, that they've been around the world. You've had 20 shows. How do they differ in different sort of countries and in different areas of the world? Do they differ much?
They do, yeah. I mean, there's certainly some regional variations. So when we've done a show in the Netherlands, for example, you can imagine that the level of bikes in that show, and even boats, because of the canals in Amsterdam, was very, very high. When we do shows in Farnborough in the UK, that's actually also an airport, and so we do have some aviation tech there. In Canada, we've had some more of the kind of mining and quarrying sort of type stuff, and even some snowmobiles and things
Wow.
like that. So there's that kind of regional variation. I think generally speaking, our audience are quite similar around the world. Very smart people, Sam, like the Driven's audience, obviously very, very smart people who kind of want to be ahead of the game, or kind of researching the tech, are passionate about it. So there's a similarity there. One of the funny things for us is, though, is when people turn up in the UK, they do tend to arrive early and queue long. In Canada, for example, they just show up sort of periodically, slowly through the day. They're much more sort of chilled out. So there's some strange stuff in the Netherlands. They're much taller. There's all little different things, but broadly speaking, you're getting the same type of experience at each show. But yeah, they do differ. And we have had, I know one guy, I think, who's pretty much been to them all, and he lives more down your part of the world than ours. And I think Sophie and I has been to 19. I think I've been to 18. Robert's been to 18. I mean, we try and go to all of them, but obviously there's circumstances sometimes. But yeah, I think there's one guy who's actually beating us, and I'm pretty sure he's from Australia.
I'm getting some free tickets now as he's following a bold member of the Everything Electric show.
Yeah, absolutely.
But any particular regional characteristics about the Australian shows?
Well, actually, I'm going to be honest. We're coming to Melbourne soon, as you know, which we're really excited about. We've only done the shows in Sydney so far. We've done 3, and we come back to Sydney in March. I think I'm not just saying this; it's my favorite show. I absolutely love it. I love Sydney. We've had an incredibly warm welcome there. I think, in part, probably due to the fact that there was a little bit of pent up demand for us to go and do a show in Australia. Also, I think where you are in the journey, that kind of like not quite 10% sales or EVs, the rest of it. I think that there was a little bit of frustration on part of our audience, of people down under, that actually this was going slowly. It's obviously picked up pace a little bit in the last 2 or 3 years, which is obviously encouraging to see. No, it is a great show. Every time we come down, it rains, but that's our fault. But it's been amazing to work in Australia and sort of start to build a small team in Australia as well. And for us, it's a really important one. What was interesting is when we do our selection of where we're going to go, because we're not done adding more events around the world over time. We do obviously look at our YouTube statistics to see where our audience are. London, unsurprisingly, which is pretty much where I live, is number 1. But actually, Sydney is number 2, Melbourne's number 3, and I think Brisbane's number 4 or 5 in our global audience. So actually, we have a huge audience in Australia, which has made it sort of second nature for us to be in that market. And yeah, we love being there, and hopefully people love having us come down periodically.
Well, I mean, there's definitely a lack of interest in Australia around the electrification of everything, and then electric vehicles in particular, as you said. But as you also said, we're not really quite there in terms of the tipping point, perhaps, or just how uptake of EVs, for example, is lagging a little bit behind some other European countries. Where are you guys at over there in terms of? Has the tipping point already happened in Europe, or what's happening?
Great question. I think probably because of our job, because of my job, we're pretty au fait with how it's going in most of the kind of main Western nations and others as well. I had started off as a heat pump battery loving kind of guy. I still love those things, but now I'm Mr. EV statistics, I think. So really from our standpoint, we look at all the markets, and to give you a flavor of where we're up to, really, by volume, the UK is the biggest battery EV market in Europe last year, bigger even than Germany. Germany's population is over 80 million. Ours is just under 70 million. So to beat them for volume is quite interesting. I think the race is on. I think they might win that crown back this year. By volume, we're number one. And basically, somewhere between 1 in 4 and 1 in 5 cars sold now, new cars sold, are battery electric in the UK. So I think you're kind of just south of 10% of new car sales. So we're at sort of like, as I say, 25%. I think the last month was 26.8%. So that was a good month. We just had a new electric car grant installed in the UK. So we would say we're sort of heading sort of towards 30%. We have a zero emission target in the UK, which wants us to get 28% by the end of this year. We'll be close to that, I think. And then if you look more broadly at Europe, obviously everyone knows about Norway. Norway and China are the two kind of leaders, and they've had significant long-term, consistent governmental support over many, many years. Norway got there early before all the misinformation, before it became political. Good for them. They're kind of done and dusted. Almost every new car that's sold there now is battery electric. The Chinese have a different motivation, which is to elevate their middle classes, to grow their economy. They are firm on this. Obviously, they're the ones that are really above all driving that kind of global change. But then if you look down into those markets, I think the UK is quite an interesting one, as is the Dutch market and the German market. So the Dutch market and the UK market were kind of neck and neck about 3 years ago. And then the UK pulled a lot of its subsidies back. There was a plug-in car grant, a plug-in charger grant. We had a disastrous mini budget. We actually changed the timeline of the zero emission vehicle mandate. And actually that knocked us back. So we were sort of about 15%. And we have just started to pick up in the last year or so, but we're now only about 25%. So actually, that subsidy piece is absolutely critical. We were neck and neck with the Dutch market. The Dutch market is now, we're at 25%-ish. The Dutch market month on month is about 35 to 40%. And in fact, the Dutch market actually at the end of last year, EV sales were almost 1 in 2 in December last year, as there was a huge rush before a subsidy ended. So the Dutch have now ended their subsidy, and they're actually now back to more like 19, 20% month on month. So one thing we would say is that even if you think you're home and hosed in this, and the subsidies are working and the market's got momentum, we always feel that this is probably going to need, subsidy in the long term. And sort of, I guess that brings us on to the kind of the Australian market, really. From our standpoint, it's going quite well. But as you say, it's, I'm sure want to get to that 15%, 20% mark as soon as possible. There was a great article in the Guardian. You may have seen it a couple of days ago about the kind of Australian EV market, and Brendan Doyle was sort of quoted as saying, once we get to 15 to 20%, the market should snowball. And that sounds like something I would have said about 4 years ago. I think the UK is a really, really good proxy for Australia because of the right-hand drive, because of the culture, all the rest of it. If subsidy is withdrawn, or if we think it's done once you get to 15 to 20%, it's suddenly going to get to 25, 30%. That's not been the case in our experience. It is a long-term battle. But yeah, the reality is the UK is doing pretty well. But we do have our own issues. Certainly economically speaking, Brexit is still a huge, huge anchor on our economy. And I was thinking, before I came in the podcast, of some of the comparisons between the UK and Australia. I think there's so many, right? And from our perspective, I was sort of just fact checking some of the different things. I think you're starting to go from this sort of 10% to hopefully 15, 20% at a time where there are well over 100 models now. In the UK it's about 150. I'd imagine you've got probably a similar number, judging by Everything Electric Sydney back in March, the amount of entrants there. The range of the cars is much more mature now. When we first started doing Fully Charged Live, as it was called back in 2018, we're doing 10 cars. They could only do, a couple of them might do 250 miles, but, it was very, very different. So that's changed significantly. We know that the average mileage that people do in Australia is not dissimilar to in the UK. So it's about I think it's about 11,000 kilometers annually. So most people could live with an EV, right? I do like 3 or 4 tons that a year in an EV. Also, what might surprise people listening is that the cost of cars and the cost of EVs in general in Australia is about 20 to 45% less than it is in the UK. Much cheaper to buy cars in Australia. The
Hmm.
cost of charging away from home is much less. Actually, it's about 50% less. You've not got that kind of. I know there are economic tensions in every country, but you have Brexited. People who left Europe, going to Australia, did that years and years ago. We're trying to set ourselves back years now by leaving. You haven't got that, and then you've got that huge solar battery and bi-directional potential, haven't you? And I think also in Chris Bowen, who we've met a few times, you've actually got a politician who kind of gets the space. So I'm very optimistic about Australia. But one thing I would say, the lessons we've seen is keep the subsidies up, keep the rebates up, whether it's the new vehicle emissions, so whatever it is, keep the pressure on it. If anytime that gets watered down, even if you think you're flying, you'll suddenly find that you're not. We've been through that in the UK, and actually it's been extremely painful.
Mm. Yeah, no, I mean, I think you're right that subsidies do play a big part. We can see that at the moment, just with the got a 30% subsidy at the moment for home battery systems, and that has just absolutely lit a fire under the home battery market in Australia, and we've seen a huge tick up in people buying battery systems for their homes. So um, is definitely a big part of the decision making process. I think in Australia, I think we do have, and one of the other issues that I'm sure is also common in other parts of the world is just around dis and misinformation and around electric vehicles. It doesn't take much for a myth to kind of stick and kind of hang around, and it takes a lot to kind of undo it. Basically, one case, for example, is it's if you have an EV, it's probably going to catch fire. In fact, it's almost definitely going to catch fire at some point, and that's going to be the end of your garage and your house. Whereas, as we know, it's no any more likely to catch fire than its ice equivalent. But um, there is a strong I think emphasis on the importance of education and how the media discusses electric vehicles, range anxiety, safety. These are concerns that are legitimate, and a lot of people have when they're thinking about buying a totally different type of vehicle. But a lot of them can also be you know uh, explained through education, and all those fears can be put to rest. I don't know if that's something that you guys have in the UK, or if maybe is that part of the success story for the UK? Have you had less of that, or been able to combat that better?
Mm. Well, I think that that's something we work on a lot. I guess probably our audience is predominantly consumer.
Mm.
Uh, and one of the brilliant things that Robert Llewellyn was able to do when he founded the channel was simplify, you know, what's going on. To talk about EVs and other technologies in plain English. I've worked with many engineers, all of whom are extremely bright, but occasionally when they're trying to explain something, they make it more complicated than not. So Robert's skills being a kind of everyman, and that's the kind of the skill I think we've taken on as a channel to be really clear about what's going on.
Mm.
So we've always been, I suppose, trying to educate, trying to myth bust. But no, we noticed a real spike in misinformation around these technologies, really from about 2022 onwards. It was always, the myths were always out there, but actually the rise of social media and the rage machine, the sort of conflict entrepreneurs who are trying to get you to click on everything, what actually that meant was, actually those stories went wild, and there's a great saying about misinformation, the a lie can travel halfway around the world before the truth has even got its trousers on, right? So the reality is, and once it's out there, it's out there. You can't put it back in the bottle. So
Mm.
we actually found that misinformation really rose around 2022. We have, I think social media has played a very large role in that. I think if you remember that time, that was actually when China was reopening post COVID, and 2022 was when a lot of the German car makers went over. I think Oliver Bloom, CEO of VW Group, took about 100 execs over to Shanghai. They hadn't really seen the cars that the Chinese were making for about 3 or 4 years because of COVID. And I think they went around the show kind of agog at the progress that the Chinese have made. And actually, just as a bit of a side note, I've just come back from the Munich show, expecting it to be a real mix of battery EVs, PHEVs, and combustion engine cars. It was almost entirely battery electric vehicle. It was stunning. and it was very clear that VW Group, Audi, Mercedes, others have picked up they're picking up the baton. Maybe they were a little bit behind, but I was blown away. And I've been to Shanghai earlier, but I expected Shanghai show to be all electric. Obviously, our shows are everything electric, so that but to go to Munich, which is the really home of the combustion engine, and see it just being awash with superb battery electric vehicles from Germany and from elsewhere was a real watershed moment for us. So I think when after the Shanghai show, then misinformation kind of really ramped. I think people maybe thought that EVs weren't going to happen in the oil industry and the fossil fuel industry, possibly some segments of the automotive industry, and then it became clear actually this is quite advanced now. Tesla obviously led the way in that respect. Obviously, China has had a huge impact. So we've seen misinformation get out of control, really. And actually, we have stepped much more into that role as an organization to try and tackle that. Keeping doing what we're doing on YouTube, but also the events are a great opportunity to put people to test drives, which is a huge, huge. It calms people down, right? They go, oh, this is good cars. What's the problem? What's they get in them? And more recently, we also started a Patreon page called Stop Burning Stuff, which was also called Stop BS, which is about tackling misinformation. If a journalist says something, saying that actually, trying to educate us, so that's not correct. Time's gone on. That's led us to form Electric Vehicles UK, which is, I guess, is synonymous with a sort of a lobby group, synonymous with Electric Vehicle Council in Australia. I spoke to them just the other day. We got on very well with them, but a little bit different in that we actually talk direct to consumer as well as to politicians and to press. Because the thing is, Sam, the rubbish that's written up in the press or online for clicks, politicians read that too, right?
Mm, mm.
So it becomes kind of a vicious cycle. They might change policy on the basis they think there are a lot of EV fires, and the reality is that if you're in the game, actually EVs are about 20 times less likely to catch fire than a combustion engine vehicle. But more than that, the majority chemistry now is LFP, which is orders of magnitude less likely to catch fire than previous chemistries. And this getting safer and safer and safer. The Chinese policy around no fire, no propagation now is extraordinary. CATL have just released version 3 of their no propagation technology. The irony is that all this focus means is that in time, once we're all electric, car fires, which existed in combustion cars and electric cars, will almost be a thing of the past. So that's the irony. But obviously, it takes a long time for the kind of the mainstream to catch up with the cutting edge. So we're trying to close that gap and help people realize that actually there really isn't anything to be afraid of. And electric vehicles aren't perfect, right? They're not perfect, but on pretty much every metric, they're cheaper and better, and that's what we're trying to get across. And that's why we formed Electric Vehicles UK.
Yeah. So on that, that seems to be a bit less about festivals and more about accelerating adoption directly.
Yeah.
So it's like an industry to consumer accelerator. And so you're trying to drive demand for EVs. Is that less, rather than acting like a lobby group, it's more just about trying to accelerate that kind of, make that connection between the industry and the consumer. Would that be a fair sort of?
Yeah, that's absolutely fair. I mean, one of the things we felt, Sam, was that there's no real, in the UK at least, there's no real EV industry. There's a car industry, sells all sorts of different powertrains, and I respect that. It's a very difficult time to be in the car industry. I always say I couldn't run a car company. It's an incredibly difficult job. Moving through this transition, very difficult. But there's a car industry lobby, a car industry group, but there's no EV industry group. And obviously, EV industry is just people who make EVs, but it's also charging infrastructure and batteries, everyone in that kind of ecosystem. So our first job really is to bring that group together under one kind of umbrella. The umbrella being Electric Vehicles UK, but actually our mantra being cheaper, better, battery electric. Nice and simple. You could put it on a cap. I'm not saying you could run for president in America and win on that slogan, but it is a nice, easy, catchy thing for people to but so it's really joining up industry under kind of one kind of message, really. The cheaper message is the single biggest thing that's going to resonate with people. So it's providing proof points for that. So we did a cost of driving electric report earlier in the year, which showed that used EV is already cheaper. Running a new EV is considerably cheaper for most people, and it's evidencing that and getting that out there. So bringing the industry together under one kind of messaging banner is really key, we felt. But we are doing some things that are akin to lobby group. We will be talking to politicians, but it's more about this top level demand thing rather than getting in the weeds of policy.
Mm.
And we're going to the Labour Party conference in the UK soon. We're putting MPs in cars, basically, to educate them there. So there is an element which we're talking politically. There's also a press element, talking to friendly press who get it, and people who are a bit more unaware of what's going on in the EV space as well. So there's that element too. But really, it's about driving demand with consumers. And I could spend a fortune on trying to reach everyone, but actually, we can't see the consumer as one big monolithic block. It's at the moment in the UK, it's sort of I think it's 1,300 EVs get sold a day, basically on average.
Okay.
So it's 1,300 different people a day. It's like 40,000 a month. It's 480,000 a year. It's how do you chip away at that edge of that ice block and actually get it to thaw a bit more quickly.
Yes.
We had all spent time chatting with people on social media, but we wish we could have that time back because they were never going to change their minds, Sam, right? What's the point in trying to really expend energy on those people? They will come quietly over to EV when in the latter stages. We really need to focus on that front end. And if people are considering EVs, generally people are hesitant, not hostile. It's how do we maybe chip away at the one or two questions they've still got left before they purchase? How do we get them to be a little bit braver and go, actually, I will do this. I know enough now to be concerned. So that driving demand piece fascinates us. We've already done it through YouTube. We know people come to the channel. YouTube is like the test drive before the test drive. They'll then come to our events for a multi-brand test drive, and then they'll purchase something. But there's other elements like how do we get the industry together to drive demand? If you're talking to a car company, I'll take one off the top of my head. Do a lot of work with Polestar, for example. Polestar want to talk about the design of their cars, which is brilliant, the sustainability credentials of their cars, which are brilliant. They don't want to sell the overall premise of EVs. That is something that actually, as an industry, we can get together and do under the sort of cheaper, better battery electric mantra, and then they can just go on and promote their own product. So it's been a really fascinating thing to set up Electric Vehicles UK. We do actually want to help what we're doing grow globally and help other organizations and other countries to adopt EVs more quickly as well. And it's great because car companies are sort of signing up to support what we're doing, which is obviously a big part of it. But so is the whole kind of EV ecosystem, and we hope that we can sort of really move the needle and and share the learnings. We know what works and we've done this, that, and the other, and then talk to other people who know what works. Is how do we can all benefit from that experience, whether you're the UK at 25% EV sales, you're Australia at sort of more like 10%, or if you're South Africa at 1%. How can we all benefit? And it's been really, really fascinating to kind of get in the gears, get in the kind of machinery, and understand actually how can we get people to move forward. But as I said, most people, they're hesitant, they're not hostile. I mean, there are some, but generally people are kind of like, it seems like it might be better. It's modern, it's very advanced technology, and it's just helping them move that kind of purchasing decision forward by a few months or years.
Just that kind of untangling of some of the what can feel like a pretty complex little web of things to untangle in order to electrify transport. And I think it's that sounds like the educational piece again is a big part of it. I did have a look at the EV UK website. It mentioned that there was a program of activities. You mentioned things like test drive database, like a consumer campaign, and like an economic value census of the UK and EV industry. So what is the test drive database? Can you tell me about that?
Yeah, we've got a 16-point program which we start imminently. We kick it at the Labour Party conference. That program will run for a year. That's supported by the industry, and then we will tweak and refine that as we go on. Okay. But yes, the highlights really for us are there are lots of test drives at our events, but those events come along every year or every twice a year in Australia. Now, for example, people are interested in test drives all year round. Mm-hmm. And those test drives are existing. So actually what we want to do is work with manufacturers and others to say, actually, at any given point, if someone wants to do a test drive, this is how they can do it.
Mm.
But it's also probably on that database, it's really elevating the ones that are multi-brand test drives, Sam, because quite often you won't go into, I don't know, pick another car company, you won't go to an Audi show. You'll kind of know what you're going to get, a sedan or an SUV, right? You'll kind of know that, and you might be shopping for an Audi, an Audi SUV versus BMW SUV, and obviously they existed. They might be it might be in different parts of Sydney, for example. I can't name. Is it Alexandria? I've visited it as an area where there's got lots of different, car stores, for example.
Yeah.
And they to shop around and do the multi-brand test drive thing might take a day, right? Or you might have to do it on multiple weekends. And by the time you test drive in the first car, you forgot for this one
Mm.
was like. So those multi-brand test drives will elevate those as well, because I think those are really good opportunities. So it really is about doing that. So a consumer at any given point, you can constantly be communicating with industry saying, do it, try it, actually, because so many people once they get in one, the kind of anxiety sort of melt away, and they just go, oh, it's just another car. In fact, it's better in some ways. It really kind of disarms people, I think. So national EV database. We also we're building an EV a census of the EV industry in the UK. So in the UK, the fear is if we go too fast, we'll lose all those great automotive jobs. And the industry is very good at saying this is how much the automotive industry is worth now, but actually no one's doing that piece saying how much the EV industry is worth and how much the EV industry will be worth by 2030, by 2035. If we stick to these targets, or we reduce the targets, if we are more ambitious.
Mm.
So we're doing a sense of the industry to get a better idea of that. And yeah, there's a whole range of other activities that we're engaging in, like micro campaigns around the cheaper, better battery electric message, just to see how that works on things like YouTube, LinkedIn, places where EV buyers are, for example. You'll know exactly what I'm talking about. We say there are some newspaper readers that are just never going to buy, but actually, if you're quite if you're a technology savvy person on LinkedIn, for example, you might be more likely to adopt EV ahead of those people. So we know it's about fishing in the right pool. I think sometimes I see the industry spending a lot of money, and you're like, I think you're fishing in the wrong pool there. You've got to find where the people who are maybe 3 months, 6 months, 12 months away from buying an EV are not the ones who are 4 or 5 years away. That's actually going to be very expensive ROI for you with your advertising.
How do you identify who those people are? Who are the type of people that are 3, 6, 12 months away from buying? What kind of characteristics do you look for there?
Yeah, we were trying to push people down that kind of sales funnel, I guess. Really, I mean, typically they're very sort of tech savvy. Often age range, you can imagine they're kind of, often in their kind of mid 30s to mid 50s. That's quite commonplace. I know. I've heard Chris Bowen and I've heard Julie LEVC talk about it. For example, I know there's quite a lot of sort of middle class, outer suburbanites buying EVs in Sydney, which pushes back against that idea that it's just the latte drinkers, the really rich people who are doing it. And I think there's actually quite a lot of people. Is that kind of middle class who are actually a bit more economy conscious, maybe, who are actually buying EVs. So there are different types of people who are doing it. There are different types politically. There's a constituency in the UK. I'm sure everyone must have heard of a gentleman called Nigel Farage, who's currently trying to take the UK back to the glorious 1970s. He is in a constituency in Essex called Clacton, which is has got a high percentage of people who voted for reform, who are maybe quite anti-renewable, anti-net zero, for example. I wouldn't be running a test drive event in Clacton right now, which is not to say that the people of Clacton aren't absolutely lovely, but then they're on average they're not ready. But if I was going to go down to Bath or Bristol in the UK, where the people vote Lib Dems, there's loads of solar panels on the roofs already. That's where we'll find kind of progressive potential EV buyers. Everyone will get one eventually. I have to laugh when people say to me, why are you making me do this? I hear that occasionally. I go, no one's making you. You could buy in the UK, you can buy a combustion powered vehicle until the end of 2034. You can run it till 2050. I mean, that's 25 years from now. No one is making you do it. But if other people want to do it, that's okay too. So our kind of saying really is that everyone will go electric in time, and just it is going to happen. You just have to do it yet. So it's a lot. There's a lot of stirring going on. There's a lot of very negative narrative around it, and sometimes it's just relax. You don't have to do it. Calm down.
Yes, yes, yes. I think there is a little bit of this. Certainly in Australia, we've experienced a bit of uh, the politicalization of EVs, and it's it's one of the things which makes being a journalist in the EV world a bit different to reviewing your standard ICE car. It's not just the car itself. You've got to take into account other things like infrastructure and but also just like there are some politics around it. We famously was, at least in Australia, it was famously, we had this campaign, in 2019 from the then Prime Minister Scott Morrison about how EVs are, advocates are hell bent on ruining your weekend, taking away your barbecue, stopping you from going into the bush and going camping. They want to force you to have these vehicles, and life as you know it will shift significantly as a result. As you said, obviously it's not the case. There's no prohibition on FEV or ICE vehicles. Far from it. Certainly in Australia. So yes, I mean, in Australia, we have a lot of people who are interested genuinely in buying their vehicle as their next vehicle, and I can point to statistics around that, but I can also, just in my own experience, with friends or with family, but also just at these everything electric shows that have been in Sydney in the past. There's a wide range of people who are there. It's not just 30-something-year-old tech finance bros who have money to spend on a Tesla. I saw people of all ages there with a genuine interest in it. So the interest is there. So as a result, I mean, I think that the economics will speak for themselves eventually, as you said. Um,
Uh, yeah, I think for us it is interesting. I just think we've got to just encourage people to try it and go for it. I think the idea that you need to have every single question answered before you buy something is quite an interesting one. I think it wouldn't necessarily do that with other things, right? Whether you're lavishing money on an expensive kitchen, or or sort of that. The decision making process. I just kind of I want one, or it's not quite the same for shifting from one different car to another. A lot of doubt's been flooded into the market to make people go, maybe I'll wait. I'm not sure. Charging is a classic case in point. Charging it is really good. I mean, it's not. I'm not saying it's perfect, but it is really, really good. You'd think from some of the hysteria around it, it was absolutely terrible. I mean, it just isn't the case. Actually, most people can charge at home. For them, it's an absolute no-brainer. It's much, much cheaper. Charging away from home in the UK and Australia, yeah, there are areas which need improvement, but the idea that there's tons of EVs stranded is just absolute nonsense. There's more combustion engine cars stranded, so it is interesting. Charging has become a way bigger thing, totally disproportionate to the issue at hand, and the industry's become quite obsessed about it. And I think it's a bit like the tail wagging the dog. Frankly, the cars are brilliant. The cars are absolutely brilliant, and you're really not going to have a problem. And in Australia and UK, infrastructure's been put in all over the place. So these sort of fears are quite interesting. I would actually say to anyone who's sort of semi-brave, I'd say just buy an EV and figure it out as you go along. It's not like it when I first got an EV. My EV had 80-mile range. That was the first one I had 10 years ago. I got out on it. It made economic sense. I knew it was going to work. I really had to figure it out with 80-mile range. Most of them now have got 250, 300 plus mile range. So sorry, I'm talking in miles and not kilometers. But it really is. It really is, I think it's much, much easier. And I think it's just about getting that across to people that, just test drive one, get one. And actually all the other stuff is really straightforward.
I mean, we do have there are some genuine concerns that people have when thinking about buying an EV. I mean, some are less serious. I mean, I had someone coming up to me and saying, yeah, I would buy an EV, but like, what if I wanted to drive from like Sydney to Broome? And I was like, are you going to drive from Sydney to Broome? Like, who actually does that? And I was like, well, probably not. But what if? Just trying to take into account every possible scenario. Which, by the way, you could feasibly do if you wanted to. But there are challenges here in Australia. I mean, charging geography could be argued as one. Incentives, consumer awareness. If the EV UK were here in Australia, I mean, what would you be telling us in Australia, and what we can do to try and you know
Well, I think I would really, we definitely would like to help, Australia on this journey as well. I think really it's just about the constant drip feed message of cheaper, better.
Mm.
And just proving that out, right? As I said, what's going to motivate some people is very different to others. For example, some people might be motivated by the fact the cars are quite quiet. Some might be environmentally motivated, but if you take one thing that's going to motivate more people than anything else, it's going to be their pocketbook, right? It's going to be the economic argument. So that's why for us, cheaper is the most important word, but we join it with better because cheaper doesn't necessarily mean inferior. So it has to be cheaper, better, and equally better doesn't necessarily mean more expensive. You're actually getting amazing tech now. We could talk about Tesla, could talk about Polestar. We also talk about the Zeekas of this world. Some of the stuff coming out, as I say, from the German manufacturers is really high level now, for example. You're getting really, really good tech here. So, and for really good value and for really good running costs, as we know. So, really just reinforcing that message of cheaper, better. That's our kind of belief. We are more reassuring over the top campaigns, so the industry can kind of get behind that and say, actually, we're just going to keep telling this story. So we did a cost of driving electric report. We then saw an energy company do an equivalence marketing campaign. We said, actually, you could charge for this much. It's like, whatever. And we see lots of people now talking about the costing because the cost is a very, very strong. Strong. When you get into the better thing, I could list 100 things why EVs are really, really good, right? But actually, we sort of bundle it under the better thing because I think that's an easier way to communicate it. Without wishing to bring up the subject of MAGA hats again, a simple message cuts through, Sam. We could talk about that's that kind of our message. I think was much more positive than that one, but if that's that inventive repetition, I would say, of that same message to get that out there and get that out of people's consciousness. I guess probably where I'm coming from most of all is that as an EV driver of long-standing, as an EV advocate of long-standing, I still have people in my family and my friends group who don't have an EV. And when they see me, they sort of look crestfallenly at me and they go, oh, I am gonna get one. I am gonna get one. But it's more, it's more expensive. And I have to sort of pause, take a deep breath, and then I have to say to them, because if they've got a car, why would you get rid of a car? Get rid of the car at the natural change point, right? But when you do get one, actually they are cheaper for this, cheaper for that, and I have to sort of talk them through that. But that's not out in the wider world, is it? If you say to most people about EVs, at some point in their response, they'll say they are more expensive, and it isn't true. So in the industry, we have to change their evidence over time through inventive repetition. We have to make them realize that actually these are really good value cars.
Yeah, I mean, I think in I don't know about the UK. In Australia, we are starting to see that, and I've seen that price parity arrive, with electric cars compared to their FEV and ICE equivalent. But I would say I do look forward to seeing even more options in that sort of starting sort of point, around the 20s, early 30s mark, and I think that will be a really important factor in flipping the momentum, because we have seen a lot of great cars come to Australia this year in the last 12 months, and we have seen a few in those sort of 30s range, but even would be great. So that's
things like the GAC Ions, the Neo Fireflies.
yeah.
I'm not sure what the BYD Dolphin Surf is called. It's the Seagull in Australia. What that's going to be called in Australia, you might know better than me. Cars on that level will be huge, but also for Australia, symbolically, emblematically, the Utes and vehicles for tradies are really, really important. So I noticed that SsangYong KGM Musso is now coming out. I think in a year's time, I think that the Ute market could be quite interesting for EVs. be big for Australia, I think.
We love Utes here, and even with the Shark 6 from BYD, that's a hybrid, but it's a decent hybrid, better than most plug-in hybrids, and they've done really well here. You see a lot of them around the streets of Sydney for sure.
Yeah.
So I can only imagine what a full BEV Ute could be.
No, it's exciting. I want to move to Sydney. I want to, I want to buy a Ute. Basically, that's my kind of ambition. My wife isn't so keen. But
You, it might be a requirement for your visa entry.
Yeah. So, and then in terms of kind of, I guess one sort of last thought from me really is that we've just come back from delivering everything electric Vancouver.
Hmm.
And the US at the moment is, Vancouver's, as people are probably aware, just north of the border from the United States, is sort of in sort of touching distance. But I went to Vancouver last summer to talk to them and say, if Trump gets in, what impact do you think this will have, and how safe a harbour is British Columbia, Vancouver, in terms of, will it have an impact on EV sales and all those other technologies? And we saw that it might, but not massive. At that point, Joe Biden was still running. I remember actually I was there when he had that catastrophic debate, and I was thinking, governor, you need to replace him. And we felt that Trump getting in was probably quite a strong possibility. Anyway, winding forward 15 months from when I went over to doing the event, what we've seen is the British Columbia has removed its rebate. The car companies are under tremendous strain because of all the tariff discussions. There are some general weakening of the economy in Canada because it is being kind of infected by what's going on south of the border. And there are other factors as well. But year on year, EV sales are now down after the rebate removal and after Trump, down by 40%.
Right. Yeah.
So that I think I would say that the political bit is very important, right?
Just say 40. Yeah, that wasn't 40.
40% year on year.
Good grief.
So again, I just I'm sort of being repetitive, I suppose, but the reality is that piece is really, really important. So I think Australia's in a really, really strong position, but I think that the idea that it will just happen naturally. I think that's I think we've seen it in the UK. We've kind of flattened out. It's starting to grow again, but obviously you're trying to build an industry. Industries and businesses, they like certainty. They like linear uptake. If we can help in any way, us Brits, avoid Australia kind of going to 15-20% and then flattening out again, a whole bunch of the companies that were serving that market not having enough money to cash flow and capital to grow. If we can help that growth and play a part in that as part of Driven, EVC, everyone else is working on that problem, we'd love to help. But I think it is our experience of the other markets has been really, really fascinating to watch. And as I say, best thing of all this year was the German Motor Show. I went to Shanghai, I walked around, I was absolutely in awe. It was amazing, but I would have expected all these Chinese EVs to go to Germany and see great EVs from the likes of Renault, Kia, Hyundai, obviously the Chinese as well. But fundamentally, the Germans was just breathtaking. I actually came back sort of really bouncing from that show because I thought, they're not really arguing now. They might try to lobby to slow it down a little bit, but they're talking about timing. They're not arguing about the destination. They know it's going to be a battery electric future. And VW and the like, and BMW with the Neue class of vehicles, they're all in on that. It's just about the timing. If they could go slightly slower, they probably prefer it. But the reality is that the product is just so good. And I actually think for car design, it's actually EVs have been a good kick up the bum for car design. I think you're seeing stuff that looks a bit different. I think it had become quite staid sort of 10, 15 years ago. So it is an interesting time. And we'll keep coming to Australia as long as you'll have us. We're back in Melbourne in the middle of November for everything electric. Melbourne, hopefully we'll see lots of people there. But from our standpoint, it's a fascinating time. And here's hoping we get to 15-20% Australia and 25-30%, and you can be down and dusted. We can all put our feet up by 2035, 2040.
That'd be nice. We just need that. We need that simple slogan, as you said. One of the most successful slogans in Australian political history was "Stop the boats." Maybe we can try a "Stop the smoke" or something like that.
Yeah. Yeah, no, that's, I mean, that is, I mean, fundamentally, people who are, on the sort of more right wing of the political spectrum, they do slogans well.
they do them well.
You know,
So I think we just need to pick what works and adopt it. So let's see if we can think of a slogan too. As you said, everything electric in Melbourne in November. The Driven is will be there. We're delighted to be partnering again with Everything Electric this year for the Melbourne show and hopefully again for the Sydney show. If you do want to buy a ticket, actually you can use the code The Driven to get 30% off at the moment. For our listeners. But yeah, it's gonna be great. Look forward to hopefully seeing you there, Dan, if you can make it. But I know it's a long way for you guys to go, and you've got about 20 million shows to attend.
I hope to be there, but I can confirm that the big stars, Robert Llewellyn, Jack Scarlett, Elliot Richards, they will definitely be there. I hope to be there as well. But I'll definitely be in Sydney. But as I can tell, I love coming down under. Twice a year with two youngish kids is a little bit challenging. But no, I will. If I'm not in Melbourne, I'll have serious FOMO.
Yeah.
I'll be in Sydney. But yeah, the team will be there. And yeah, the again, amazing brands signing up to be part of that. Tons of test drives. I just think it's just a fun day out, to be completely honest. And obviously, we love working with the Driven. Keep doing what you're doing. We always watching, reading your newsletters on your website every day.
Oh, well, thank you, and thank you very much for your time on joining us on the Driven podcast. And you're back with the Driven podcast with Sam Parkinson. So I hope you enjoyed that interview with Dan as much as I did. We'll be back again with another episode of the Driven podcast, probably within the week. We've got quite a few lined up at the moment, so a bit more frequent than normal. But hopefully, you would agree that's a good thing. Thank you very much to Dan for taking the time to join from London. And as you would have heard in that interview, the Everything Electric show is scheduled for Melbourne in November, I believe 14 to 16. If you do want to go, you can use the code The Driven at checkout, and you'll get 30% off the ticket sale. So do check that out, and The Driven will be there. We may even be recording a live podcast from there. So please do come down and say hi, and maybe take part in a live podcast, and we'll be back in probably about a week with the next episode of the Driven podcast. Thanks again to our sponsor, the Australian Electric Vehicle Association, AEVA, for your support. And until next time, take care.